Hey everybody, RetroPie guy here. Today I'm going to do a brief introduction into RetroPie. So we're going to talk about what RetroPie is, what its capabilities are, and why you would use it. So this isn't going to be a video for you if you are already involved with RetroPie, you already have a RetroPie setup, because you already know pretty much everything there is to know, or most things there are to know about RetroPie. But maybe you'll pick up some additional information, so maybe don't hit that X in the corner just yet. Hear me out for a little bit. Maybe you'll learn something new about RetroPie that, even if you've been using it for a while, you just didn't know. So the reason that I'm doing this video today is because there's no real great starting point for anybody to really start to understand what RetroPie is, what its capabilities are, and what you would use it for. Typically what people will do is they'll Google or they'll YouTube RetroPie, and they'll find a handful of different bits of information or videos here on YouTube. Watch a handful of videos, piece it all together, and you start to get a understanding for what it is. But there's no straightforward basic video that's going to tell you from scratch what it is, what its capabilities are, and why you'd be using it. So that's why I want to put this video together today, to hopefully give the person that has heard about RetroPie but maybe doesn't have any real knowledge on it some solid information to get started with. So first thing I want to talk about is obviously RetroPie is an emulation platform. It's directly tied to the Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi is a single board computer. There's various models. This is the Raspberry Pi 4. This is the most common one currently. There is a Raspberry Pi 3. It's not as widely used these days because the 4 has come out a couple of years ago and definitely has some more capabilities on this. So everybody is typically going to be going with the 4 as of right now. There is going to be another version to the 4 coming out in the near future. And then they're also going to be doing a Raspberry Pi 5. They haven't started the Raspberry Pi 5 yet, at least at the time of this video being filmed. So, they're a couple of years out on that. But there's also some other Raspberry Pi products out there, a bunch of them actually, but there's also the Raspberry Pi Zero or the Raspberry Pi Zero W. That's a much smaller computer board. This one's already compact. That one's actually much smaller. Typically only found in the GPI case handheld, which is a Game Boy style handheld video game console. Doesn't have as many capabilities as the larger Raspberry Pi 4 does here. Now, I'm going to be referring mostly to the Raspberry Pi 4 today because this is the most popular single board computer from Raspberry Pi. This comes in 3 different versions. You have a 2GB RAM, 4GB RAM, and 8GB RAM. If you're buying this to do primarily retro gaming, I recommend going with the 4GB RAM. I have a video that talks about the different versions and which one's best, which is the 4GB RAM. It goes into much more detail on that, so I'll put a link in the description below so you can view that video if you're curious to know what the difference are between the 2, 4, and 8GB versions. But moving on, so RetroPie is going to be tied to working only on Raspberry Pi products. You're not going to be using this on your Dell desktop computer or anything like that. It's going to be specifically to be used on Raspberry Pi's single board computers. So a really great thing about a Raspberry Pi running RetroPie is you're able to get into a wide range of retro game collections. So you can do your classic arcade, you can do your Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Master System, Mega Drive, all these early retro game collections. So typically everything up until the N64 and Dreamcast is where I say is the cutoff for what the Raspberry Pi is capable of emulating. PSP, you can get into some games, but it's split down the middle. You can get into some and not others. Same thing with N64. N64, you can get into about 75% of the games for the most part. And then some of them are just too much for it to handle. Sega Saturn is another one. Not super great emulation. You can get into just only a couple of games as of the time of this video. I think that will change over time, but so it does have some limitations with what collections you can get into. You can't get into GameCube, you can't get into PS2, you can't get into Xbox. All of those are just going to exceed what the actual Raspberry Pi is capable of handling. So, but the way that RetroPie works is, RetroPie is an operating system basically that goes into a micro SD card. So you would flash an image or the RetroPie software, if you want to create your own image, onto a micro SD card. The micro SD card goes into the micro SD card slot located at the back side of the Raspberry Pi. And you would typically put this into a case. So I have a basic case here. I'll show you what it looks like put together. So it's something like this right here. It opens up, usually they'll open up into 2 or 3 parts. So here I have the basic bottom piece. You just slide this into that. Now you'll notice that there's 4 screw holes on the board itself. You would put 4 screws into that just to lock it down into the bottom of the actual case here. And then most of these are going to have a cooling fan. So I'm not going to be installing the cooling fan for you today, just to show you this. So this snaps on top. You'll notice that there's 4 posts on top of the top piece here. You get a little cooling fan that sticks right on top of there. When you buy a cooling fan case, it comes with all of the screws, cooling fan, everything you need to get started. And then you would actually connect the cooling fan to those pins on the Raspberry Pi. Really simple. This clicks right down on top. And now you have your video game console right here, obviously using that Raspberry Pi computer board. Really easy to deal with, really easy to assemble. So obviously I didn't put that cooling fan in here for this little demo that I just did for you, but to actually put the cooling fan in here adds maybe a minute onto the assembly time here. So 1.5 to 2 minutes to fully assemble the cooling fan case with the Raspberry Pi inside. And you have this super compact video game console. These are capable of emulating sometimes 24,000, 40,000 games, depending on obviously the size of your game and the size of the micro SD card that you flash RetroPie to. So really the biggest thing I think about using this particular RetroPie emulation platform over any of the other ones out there, and there are other ones out there, many of which have more capabilities than RetroPie, because RetroPie is tied directly to the Raspberry Pi computer board. So you're dealing with limitations of the computer board here. So it's not so much that RetroPie has limitations, it's that RetroPie deals with Raspberry Pi's products, and those single board computers have limitations. So you have a limitation in terms of which collections you can get into. Something like Batocera on a full-size PC that's 10 times bigger than this, obviously is going to be able to handle a wider range of collections. But the really cool thing about this is it's super compact. We're talking about 2.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches deep. And then the height with the case is about 1.5 inches. So super compact. There's no smaller game console out there than this, especially with the capability of emulating, thousands and thousands and thousands of retro video games. So it's really cool in that regard. The other thing that's really nice about this is you can power an arcade off of this. So think about full-size arcade cabinet. I have one behind me. It's not full-size, but the components of it are exactly the same as a 2-player arcade. It's a little bit smaller. This one's mounted to the wall versus having, the full-size cabinet, which takes up obviously much more space. I'm in a small room, so I went with this model, but the capabilities are the same. Whereas a typical cabinet would have 1 game usually. Sometimes you get a cabinet that has multiple games if you go with the arcade 1-up cabinets now. Those can have up to 4 games on them. All you have to do is attach this to the monitor in there, a couple wires inside, and you could turn an arcade cabinet into a system that has, sometimes 24,000 games, sometimes 40,000 games. All of these games could be on one system. So it's really amazing in that regard, and the fact that it's so small. This cabinet behind me actually has a Raspberry Pi located inside of the actual control board here. I have the controls going right into it. They connect via those USB ports on the front here. And you're able to power this. This particular one behind me has 15,240 games. Actually, a couple more than that, but I always say 15,240. It's like 248 or something like that, but off of this one setup here. So that's possible because of RetroPie and the Raspberry Pi 4 in here. So that's basically how everything works. So now there are a lot of moving parts to this. It's not super cut and dry. There's a lot of different capabilities, a lot of functions, a lot of different mappings you can do depending on what your control setup is going to be like. Obviously, a control setup like this, where you have 2 controls, or 2 players rather, each with I have a joystick here, 6-button configuration, plus a start button and a select on the side. So the mapping varies depending on which collection you're going to be primarily playing, and if you want a different controller for each collection, or one controller that would be able to be capable of emulating and playing along with all the different collections that are on the RetroPie system. So RetroPie is really an amazing platform. I can't say that it is the best platform, again, because it does have its limitations, but I think it's the best in terms of size and functionality, and the way that it can be used with various setups. So you can use this as a home console setup, playing it like you would an Xbox or a PlayStation. It connects from the HDMI port here to your TV or monitor. Power supply goes in there, the card goes in the back. You can use Bluetooth controllers, so you don't have to utilize wired ones to the USB ports here on the front. You can use wired ones. You can also connect a mouse. You can connect a keyboard. You can do pretty much everything that a standard computer can do with this. And the cool thing about Raspberry Pi's product is you don't have to just use RetroPie. You can swap out that card and be able to turn this into a actual PC. So a lot of different capabilities here, but I particularly love RetroPie because of the convenience of it, because of the compact size. I can take this with me. I can put this up on my mantle in my living room, play with my family in there. I can bring this into my office here. I can put it in the arcade cabinet behind me. I've done all of these things, and I use this in various different rooms of the house. I take this with me on the go if I want. I can plug it into a friend's house. It's not specific to here. The size of this, very much different than the size of a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox One. We're talking about probably a fraction of the size, really. I mean, 3.5 inches by 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches thick. This is just super small, and it has thousands upon thousands of games if you decide to set it up that way. So capabilities here are endless, but that's basically the basic introduction to RetroPie and the Raspberry Pi 4, or if you're using a different Raspberry Pi, the 3 is very similar to this, a little bit more limitation in terms of collections you can get into, and then the Pi Zero, much smaller than this. Capabilities are also much smaller. You can't get into as many games. It won't run and emulate games as smoothly because it is much smaller. Just the capabilities are much more limited. So Raspberry Pi 4 at the time of this video is going to be your best bet. It's going to get you into the most games, going to give you the best experience. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to help you out. I love helping people out, love discussing everything further with everybody. I have a ton of videos. In fact, the majority of this YouTube channel is dedicated to RetroPie, if you couldn't tell by the name of the channel. So you can pretty much get from our channel all the information you could ever want or need for RetroPie. So we can show you how to set up just about every controller configuration out there with RetroPie, how to get started with adding games, how to get started with just every single aspect of RetroPie and Raspberry Pi. So definitely check out our channel. I recommend subscribing because we put out a lot of different content. We do a lot of gameplay demos, a lot of tutorial videos. Again, we've covered just about everything there is to cover on RetroPie and Raspberry Pi products. So definitely subscribe to us. Feel free to reach out to us. Like I said, any questions, concerns, anything like that, reach out. We're happy to help out. Really easy to get a hold of. I try to make sure that we respond to every single comment out there. Sometimes, here and there, something will squeak by us if we don't get alerted to the notification, but definitely try to get in touch with everybody that reaches out. So feel free to reach out to us and like the video if you found this helpful. Hopefully you did. So again, that's going to do it for today. So hit the like button, subscribe to us, and we'll see you guys soon.